I never expected a simple email notification to change the entire direction of my life. It arrived on a quiet Tuesday morning, tucked between promotional spam and meeting reminders. The subject line looked harmless at first glance, almost boring, something like compensation update. But the moment I opened it, my breath froze. My annual bonus, the one I had earned after 12 brutal months of extra hours, late-night calls, and carrying entire projects on my back, had been erased. Not reduced, not delayed, completely wiped out as if my hard work had never existed. I remember staring at the screen, waiting for the numbers to magically reappear, convincing myself it was a glitch. But the company I worked for didn't make mistakes like that. They were too precise, too structured, too cold. They calculated everything, especially what they could take from us without losing us. For years, I had watched colleagues get squeezed dry like lemons, all while executives smiled about cost optimization. That day, I realized I had become their next easy cut. Still, something about this decision felt different. It wasn't just unfair, it was personal. My manager couldn't meet my eyes later that afternoon. HR responded with a copy-paste line about strategic reallocation. And when I checked the internal approval chain, I saw a signature that didn't belong there. Someone way above my pay grade. A director I had never even spoken to. Strangely, the decision was marked confidential, as if they expected pushback and wanted to shut it down before it started. But the real twist came when I tried to access a document I had worked on just a week earlier, a compliance report for a multi-billion-dollar license renewal. Suddenly, my permission was revoked. A file I had authored myself was now restricted. That was the moment I understood something big was happening behind the scenes. Something they didn't want me anywhere near. And maybe they were right to worry, because, without realizing it, they had pushed away the one person who knew the license renewal process better than anyone else in the building. The one person who had spent months digging through their messy data, flagging issues that, if ignored, could cost the company not thousands, not millions, but billions. And while I never planned to use that knowledge against them, they made the mistake of crossing the line first. For days, I tried to shake it off. I told myself to be mature, to walk away, to let it go. But it kept eating at me. Every time I saw a colleague dragging themselves through exhaustion to earn a paycheck that barely kept up with rising costs, I felt a weight in my chest. We were all giving everything while they kept taking more. And now, wiping my bonus clean, after all the promises, all the pressure, all the sacrifices, felt like the final straw. It wasn't about money anymore. It was about dignity. The truth is, I hadn't always been this person. I wasn't rebellious. I wasn't a troublemaker. I wasn't even particularly bold. But betrayal changes people. It cracks something open inside you. And once that fire starts burning, it refuses to go out quietly. Small things began to click in my mind. The rushed deadlines. The sudden secrecy. The new directors who walked in like they owned the place. The whispers about possible audits. The tension in meetings whenever the license was mentioned. I thought it was normal corporate chaos at first. But now it looked like a storm they were desperately trying to hide. One afternoon, after another cold HR email telling me the decision was final, I sat at my desk staring at the wall. I remember thinking, maybe it's time to leave. Maybe I should just resign and move on. But as I packed my things into a cardboard box, something unexpected happened. My phone buzzed with a message from a colleague who rarely talked. It said only 5 words. They did the same to me. That tiny message lit a spark. If it wasn't just me, then there was a pattern. An intentional one. I replied cautiously, trying not to reveal too much. But he sent back a voice note, shaky, frustrated, explaining how his own bonus had vanished without explanation. And then another message from a different coworker. Then another. By evening, it felt like half the floor had been blindsided, right before the final license review phase. That's when everything fell into place. The company was cutting costs to make last-minute numbers look clean before submitting the license documents. They were desperate to show strong internal financial discipline, even if it meant robbing their own employees. They didn't expect anyone to push back because they believed nobody working in that building had the power to effect something as massive as a $2.1 billion license renewal. They didn't know they were wrong. I had been involved in that project since day one. I knew every requirement, every regulation, every loophole, every detail the auditors would inspect. I knew where the compliance gaps were buried, the ones the executives were trying so hard to cover up instead of fixing properly. And most importantly, I knew the exact step where everything would fall apart if the wrong document or missing confirmation landed in the wrong inbox. Even then, I didn't want revenge. I wanted fairness. I wanted acknowledgement. I wanted them to admit they handled this badly. So I tried one last time. I wrote an email to HR with calm reasoning, asking for review. They didn't respond. I emailed the director who signed off on the cut, ignored. I reached out to my manager who quietly suggested I let it go before it becomes a problem. A problem. For them or for me. That night, I sat alone in my apartment with my laptop open, staring at the untouched dinner on the table. I wasn't angry anymore. I felt strangely clear. Focused. Like someone who stopped being afraid of consequences. If a company believes they can erase people without any accountability, someone eventually has to remind them that actions have weight. And sometimes that reminder hits harder than expected. I didn't sabotage anything. I didn't lie. I didn't break a rule. I simply followed the process exactly as it was written, very, very literally. And when the regulators asked a question that only I had the answer to, I gave the full truth. Not the edited truth the executives preferred. Not the convenient truth that made the company look clean. Just the truth they had been avoiding. And suddenly, the company realized the one person they underestimated was the only one capable of holding them accountable. What happened next is the part nobody in the building was prepared for. Because the moment the auditors dug into the report I submitted, the cracks began to show. The tiny errors, ignored for months, became giant red flags. The shortcuts the executives took became compliance violations. And the silence they forced on employees, myself included, became a turning point they could never undo. I didn't set out to destroy anything. I didn't even think about consequences beyond my own job. But by the time the final decision came down, the company's $2.1 billion license stood on the edge of collapse, and everyone wanted to know how it happened. And the real story starts right there. Just when they thought they could silence me, the truth made more noise than they ever imagined. And in the next part, I'll tell you exactly how a missing bonus turned into a corporate checkmate that nobody saw coming. The fallout didn't happen overnight. In fact, the days right after the auditors began asking questions felt strangely quiet, almost too calm, like the silence before a storm you can sense but can't see. At work, people whispered in corners, speaking in low voices, carefully choosing their words. Every conversation seemed to stop the moment someone else walked by. Even the senior managers, usually loud and confident, moved around with tense faces, checking their phones every few minutes as if waiting for something they couldn't control. I kept my head down, pretending everything was normal. I didn't want to draw attention to myself, not yet. I hadn't done anything wrong, but guilt is a strange thing. Even when you're right, you feel eyes on you. And I knew the executives were already searching for someone to blame or silence before the auditors connected the dots. But the truth is, the story hadn't started with the erased bonus. It went deeper, long before that moment. And maybe understanding what led here would explain why everything felt like it was spiraling out of their hands. When I first joined the company 3 years earlier, I was hopeful, eager, and honestly proud. It was one of the top firms in the industry, known for handling billion-dollar approvals, licenses, and compliance projects that shaped entire markets. To me, it felt like stepping into a world where serious decisions were made. I wanted to be part of something big. I wanted to grow. And for a while I did. My first year was almost perfect. My team was supportive, my work was recognized, and my manager used to say I was the backbone of the department. But as the company expanded, everything began to shift. They hired new directors, brought in outside consultants, and pushed aggressive targets without increasing resources. Suddenly, the friendly atmosphere turned into something colder. People were being measured, compared, and quietly squeezed. The message was simple: produce more, complain less. The license project started around that time, and it was massive. The kind of project that could make or break careers. Everyone wanted to be part of it because the exposure was huge. I was assigned to the core compliance team, not because I asked, but because I had a reputation for being detail-oriented. In corporate language, that usually means you're the one who does the heavy lifting without asking for credit. And that's exactly what happened. The project required hundreds of documents, cross-department approvals, risk assessments, audit trails, and regulatory submissions. Most people avoided the complicated parts, but I ended up responsible for cleaning up the messy data. I didn't mind at first. I liked solving difficult problems. But the deeper I went, the more issues I uncovered: missing reports, outdated forms, incomplete filing, inconsistent numbers. Sometimes it felt like I was patching holes in a sinking ship. I raised every red flag I found. I emailed managers, highlighted risks, requested meetings. But instead of fixing the issues, they pushed me to move faster, write shorter explanations, and focus on what's essential. I didn't understand it back then, but now I realize they weren't ignoring me because they were careless. They were ignoring me because fixing the problems would delay the project. And delays were something the new directors could not afford. The pressure came from the top. The executives kept telling us the $2.1 billion license was a must-win. It was tied to major investors, future expansion, and massive partnerships. If anything went wrong, the financial impact would be huge. At one point, they even brought in a specialist from another country to help us streamline compliance. But all he did was repeat the same phrase over and over: we need speed, not perfection. 4 months, we worked in survival mode. Long nights, rushed submissions, constant stress. And during those long nights, I built a mental map of how everything worked, where the documents were stored, who signed off what, which details the regulators checked closely, and which parts would cause trouble if mishandled. That knowledge became both a strength and a burden, because once you see cracks in a system, you can't unsee them. And someone at the top knew exactly how valuable that knowledge was, which is probably why, weeks before the bonus erasure, my access suddenly expanded without explanation. I was given editing rights to folders I never requested, including sensitive documents usually reserved for senior leads. At the time, I thought it was because of my performance. I didn't realize they were preparing to push more work onto me without increasing my pay or title. Or maybe they were preparing for something else entirely. The first strange incident happened 2 months before everything collapsed. I was working late when 2 executives walked into the compliance room, not knowing I was behind the cabinet organizing files. They spoke in hushed voices, but I caught enough to understand their concern. They were worried the audit team would not accept the current numbers, and that the gap needs to be covered before submission. I heard my name mentioned, followed by a nervous laugh and the phrase, "He won't question it." He's dependable. Dependable. That word stung differently after everything that happened. Another incident came weeks later, during a meeting with the external consultant. He was walking us through a risk assessment when he accidentally pulled up an internal slide marked, "For directors only." In those 3 seconds before he rushed to switch screens, I noticed a section labeled mitigation through discretionary adjustments. I didn't know what it meant then. Now I do. Things weren't being fixed. They were being hidden. But the biggest sign came from the culture shift. People who once challenged decisions began staying silent. A few long-term employees resigned quietly with vague farewell messages. One analyst, brilliant and outspoken, was moved to a different team after raising too many questions. It was like someone was rearranging the pieces of the board to make sure no one stood in the way. And through all of this, I kept working harder, convincing myself that effort would eventually be recognized. Then the bonus disappeared. That was the moment all the little signs from the past year snapped together like puzzle pieces. It wasn't a random cut. It wasn't a mistake. It was a strategy. They were tightening budgets, reducing employee costs, and cleaning the financial sheets just enough before the final review. And anyone who would ask uncomfortable questions or expose inconsistencies was conveniently pushed to the side. The strange part is, even as tension grew, none of the directors expected the auditors to dig so deeply. Maybe they thought their shortcuts would slip through unnoticed. Maybe they thought employees would stay quiet. Maybe they thought the regulators were too busy. They underestimated everything. By the time the auditors began their preliminary review, they had already picked up traces of missing data. Nothing dramatic at first, just small issues like incomplete dates or mismatched codes. But small issues are like loose threads. Pull one hard enough, and the whole fabric comes undone. The directors scrambled to fix things, but the pressure made them sloppy. They sent rushed instructions, panicked messages, and last-minute revisions to documents that were already locked. Some were corrected, some were left hanging, some contradicted earlier submissions. And I watched it all quietly, knowing the moment was coming when someone would finally ask the right question. And when that happened, the truth would spill out whether anyone liked it or not. The truth was never the enemy. The cover-ups were. In all this chaos, I kept thinking about how fast things changed. One erased bonus exposed years of hidden cracks. One ignored warning turned into a major investigation. One employee they underestimated, me, became the only person who knew where the real risks were buried. But the directors still believed they could control the narrative. And maybe they would have, if not for the unexpected discovery the auditors made next. A discovery that changed everything, heightened the stakes, and pulled me deeper into a situation I never planned to be part of. What they found was just the beginning. And in the next part, I'll tell you what they uncovered, the clue that made the entire $2.1 billion license tremble. The auditors didn't raise their voices when they made the discovery. They didn't storm into meetings or confront anyone dramatically. Instead, they did something far more dangerous. They went quiet. The kind of quiet that made people nervous. The kind of quiet that meant they had found something significant and were now watching to see how everyone reacted. It started with a small request. They asked for a document called the Cross-Functional Certification Summary, something that should have been routine and easy to provide. But when they opened it, the dates didn't match. One section showed approvals completed last month, but the metadata revealed the file had been edited only 2 days earlier. Normally, this could be brushed off as a formatting update, but the auditors were not new to this game. They had seen enough corporate tricks to know when someone was trying to repaint the walls right before inspection. And that was just the beginning. When they requested the earlier version of the file, the tension in the room shifted. The executives stalled, claiming the system was under maintenance or running slow. But the auditors weren't distracted. They calmly asked for the access log instead. Who edited the file? When and from which account? That simple question sent a shockwave through the building. My manager walked around with a stiff smile, pretending nothing was wrong, but his hands shook every time he touched his laptop. A few directors held sudden, urgent strategy calls. Some employees whispered that the IT team had been pulled into a closed-door meeting. The more the executives tried to hide their fear, the more obvious it became that whatever the auditors found had the potential to unravel much more than a single document. I stayed silent, keeping my distance. I didn't want to get dragged in unless I had no choice. But deep inside, I knew it was only a matter of time before someone connected the file changes to the broader compliance gaps I had flagged months earlier. And then, the first subplot emerged. Late one evening, after most people had left, I received a message on my internal chat from someone in the risk department. We had barely interacted before, but the tone of his message was urgent. He asked if I could meet him in one of the empty conference rooms. When I arrived, he was pacing back and forth, running his hands through his hair. He said they had discovered something worse than mismatched dates. During a routine check, one of the auditors found a section of the risk matrix that didn't align with the underlying data. Someone had manually downgraded the severity of several issues. These weren't tiny problems. These were major compliance risks that should have been escalated months ago. I asked him who made the changes. He looked at me with a conflicted expression and said my name appeared in the edit history. My heart dropped. I knew I hadn't touched that file. And for a moment, a wave of panic rose inside me until he quietly added, "The timestamp doesn't match your login hours. Someone edited it under your profile after midnight." That was when I understood what was happening. Someone was using my access, my permissions, and my reputation to clean up things they didn't want the auditors to see. And now that the auditors were digging deeper, that same access trail could be used to turn the blame toward me if things went wrong. It wasn't paranoia. It was strategy. I didn't know who did it or how deeply I was being dragged into the mess, but I finally saw the conflict clearly. The story wasn't just about a license or a bonus or a mistake. It was about survival at the highest levels of the company. The executives were trying to protect themselves, and the easiest way to do that was to place all responsibility on the one person who had seen the cracks but didn't hold a powerful title. A perfect scapegoat. At the same time, another subplot developed quietly, one involving the employees who had lost their bonuses. More people came forward, sharing their stories privately. Some experienced unexplained deductions. Others had their performance ratings changed after the audit requests began. One senior analyst confessed she had been pressured to rewrite sections of the compliance report without question. It became clear that the bonus cuts were not just financial adjustments, they were part of a larger pattern of tightening control. By reducing payouts, the company saved money. But by also intimidating employees, they reduced the chances of internal resistance, right when the license approval was most vulnerable. But the directors underestimated how resentment grows in silence. People who had never spoken up before started sharing documents, screenshots, old emails. It wasn't coordinated, not at first. But slowly, a quiet network formed, and I found myself at the center of it. Not because I wanted to be, but because everyone believed I knew the bigger picture. And in truth, I did. Meanwhile, the auditors continued their investigation. They began requesting older submissions, system backups, archived emails, and original logs. The tension inside the building thickened with every passing hour. Rumors circulated that the external consultant was now under scrutiny too, especially after they discovered a pattern of repeated last-minute edits on critical submissions. What made the situation even more intense was the shifting behavior of the executives. They stopped walking around. They stayed in their offices or held private meetings in corners of the building. Their expressions grew sharper, more cautious. They avoided eye contact. One director even accused the audit team of being overly intrusive, which only made things worse. Then something unexpected happened. One afternoon, while I was analyzing a data set, a senior compliance officer approached me. She had barely acknowledged me before, but this time, her tone was strangely soft. She asked if I had a few minutes to talk. When we stepped into a small meeting room, she closed the door behind us and lowered her voice. She said the auditors had found inconsistencies in the sequence of approvals during the early stages of the license project. In basic terms, some approvals were marked completed before the underlying documents were even created. And while this might seem like a minor clerical error, in the compliance world, it was a huge red flag. But then she said something that changed the entire direction of the conflict. She told me that the auditors specifically asked about me, not because I was suspected. They said that my earlier reports, the ones I had sent months ago, appeared to predict the exact issues they were now uncovering. They wanted to know why my warnings had been ignored. They wanted to know who overrode them. They wanted to know who instructed changes. Her voice trembled slightly as she explained it. The executives realized the auditors might discover that key decisions had been made against my recommendations. And if the auditors traced the manipulation of the risk documents back to someone using my profile, that would be even harder to explain. The conflict had reached a dangerous point. The executives needed the license approved at any cost. The auditors needed the truth for compliance integrity. The employees wanted fairness and accountability. And I was caught directly at the intersection of all three forces. That was when the senior compliance officer leaned forward and asked the question that sealed my fate. Did you keep copies of your original reports? I didn't answer immediately. Her eyes searched mine, not with suspicion but with concern. She wasn't asking to accuse me. She was asking because she knew the truth might soon come out, and she wanted to know if I had anything that could protect me. I told her yes. I had backups, not because I expected trouble, but because I always saved everything. Her expression shifted from relief to fear in a matter of seconds. She told me to keep them safe, offline, hidden, and not to trust anyone, not even her, until the audit concluded. The tension in that room was something I'll never forget. It felt like the walls were closing in, like every move mattered. And for the first time, I understood the real scale of the conflict. This wasn't a workplace disagreement. It was a corporate war happening underneath polished hallways and professional smiles. And the next thing the auditors uncovered would push everything even closer to collapse. What they found next didn't just threaten the license. It threatened the people who had the most to lose from the truth. And in the following part, I'll take you right into the discovery that made the entire company panic behind closed doors, because it was something none of them ever expected to come to light. The next few days felt unreal, like the walls of the company were slowly tightening around everyone. The atmosphere shifted from nervous to suffocating. People walked faster, spoke less, and avoided eye contact like it was dangerous. Even the cafeteria, usually loud and crowded, felt muted. No one wanted to say anything that could be overheard or taken the wrong way. It was as if the entire building knew something was coming, something big, and no one wanted to be caught in the wrong place when it arrived. The auditor's questions became sharper. They were no longer asking for routine logs or routine clarifications. They were asking for things that could change the entire narrative: original drafts, deleted files, timestamps, account activity from specific hours, archived approval chains. Every request had weight, like they were pulling invisible threads that connected to something larger. And every time they asked for a file, someone in leadership seemed to panic quietly under the surface. I tried to stay steady, but the pressure was building around me too. My name came up more often in conversations. People whispered, wondering if I was involved or if I knew something. A few coworkers looked at me with sympathy, like they expected I was going to be blamed soon. Others avoided me entirely, as if talking to me was risky. But the strange thing was the sudden attention from the upper floors. One afternoon, a director who had never spoken to me before stopped me near the elevator. He smiled too politely, asked how things were going, hinted that everyone appreciates your hard work, and then added one line that made my stomach twist. It would be helpful if we all stayed aligned on what really happened in the early stages of the project. Aligned. A polite word for cooperate with our version of the story. I nodded, pretending not to understand, but the message was clear. They were preparing their defenses, and they wanted to know whether I would play along or become a threat. Around the same time, the network of employees who had lost their bonuses became more active. What started as quiet complaints turned into a steady flow of shared information. People were tired of being silent. They had screenshots, old emails, timeline mismatches, and inconsistencies that revealed how decisions were made. Someone even found evidence that a few performance reviews had been altered after submission. But the employees didn't know the whole picture. They didn't know how deeply the license issues ran. And I couldn't tell them, not yet. If I revealed too much, it could put me in danger before the truth was ready to surface. Then the main trigger came. The auditors found an encrypted folder buried inside the compliance archives. It wasn't labeled properly. It wasn't documented. And it wasn't supposed to exist. When they requested access, the IT team hesitated. They claimed it was a technical backup. But the auditors pushed, and eventually, the permissions were granted. What they found inside changed everything. The folder held early drafts of the license submission, versions that were never shared with the team. These drafts revealed higher risks, larger financial discrepancies, and flagged issues that had somehow disappeared in the final version. It was clear that someone had rewritten the history of the project, smoothing over the dangerous parts and creating the illusion of stability. Among those drafts, one document stood out. It contained a list of unresolved compliance gaps. Notes were attached from someone in the senior team, stating, "We'll address later, no immediate risk." But the risks listed were serious. And worse, many of them were risks I had identified months earlier, risks I had documented in detail, risks I had emailed about repeatedly. But this version didn't include my emails. It didn't include any of my warnings. It was as if someone had gone out of their way to erase my involvement from the early stages entirely. And that meant only one thing. Someone had planned to rewrite the narrative long before the audit even started. The discovery rippled through the office without a single word spoken. People sensed something had shifted. Executives locked themselves in conference rooms. The IT department worked late into the night. The compliance leads walked around stiffly, whispering urgently among themselves. Meanwhile, the auditors asked to interview me again. This interview felt different. They weren't asking for basic information anymore. They asked about the timelines, the missing warnings, the overwritten files. They asked who instructed certain revisions. They asked who had access to the restricted folders. And then they asked the question I had been dreading. Did you ever notice edits made from your account that you didn't make? I froze for a moment. I knew this was a turning point. My answer would ripple through the company. If I said yes, then someone from the leadership team would face the spotlight. If I hesitated or softened my answer, the executives could twist the narrative. But before I could respond, one of the auditors added, "We already have access logs." The way he said it, calm, steady, almost reassuring, told me they weren't testing me. They already knew something. They just wanted to hear whether I would speak honestly. So I told them the truth. I explained the late-night edits, the mismatched login times, the strange access expansions I never requested. I told them I had flagged risks that were ignored. And I admitted that I suspected someone higher up had used my profile because I was the easiest person to frame if things went wrong. When I finished, the room fell silent. The lead auditor nodded slowly, then handed me a printed sheet. It was a copy of an access log showing activity from my account at times I wasn't even in the building. Seeing it in black and white made the situation real in a way it hadn't felt before. Someone had planned this much earlier than I realized. And now the truth was surfacing. But the intense part came immediately after. The auditors requested an emergency meeting with the heads of 3 departments. The invitation was sent electronically, and within minutes, the entire leadership team rushed upstairs. The glass walls of the top conference room showed tense faces, stiff posture, hence gripping folders too tightly. No one knew exactly what was being discussed, but everyone could feel the pressure. The building felt like it was holding its breath. The conflict was reaching its breaking point. Employees started gathering in quiet clusters, speculating. Some believed the license might be canceled. Others thought resignations were coming. A few feared layoffs. The stress was everywhere, on people's faces, in their voices, in the way they typed. And through all this tension, I received one more unexpected message. It came from someone I hadn't spoken to in months. A former colleague who had quit during the early stages of the license project. The message was short, almost cryptic. Check the early drafts. You'll understand why they pushed you out. My pulse spiked. If he knew something about those drafts, then maybe the conflict was bigger than I thought. Maybe the executives had been hiding something long before the auditors arrived. Maybe my erased warnings weren't accidental. Maybe the fake edits weren't improvised. They were part of a plan. The message ended with one final line. They never wanted this project to be clean. They just wanted it approved. That single sentence revealed the heart of the conflict. This wasn't about mistakes. It was about intent. And now the auditors were closing in. The executives were cornered. The employees were awake. And I was standing right at the center as everything prepared to break open. In the next part, the storm that had been building from the beginning will finally hit its peak, and the real story behind the license will come dangerously close to exploding. The moment Sophia's eyes shifted toward the shadow near the half-open door, the air around her seemed to freeze. She didn't call out, yet her breath caught in her throat as if her body already understood the danger before her mind did. Alex sensed the change instantly and followed her gaze, but by the time he turned his head, the shadow had already slipped deeper into the hallway. For a second, it felt like they were being watched by something, or someone that didn't want to be found. Sophia walked slowly toward the door, each step careful, quiet, almost hesitant. The room behind it was supposed to be empty, just a storage space filled with old files and dusty boxes. But the faint scrape they heard didn't match the stillness the room should have held. When she pushed the door open, the dim yellow light flickered once, then steadied, revealing nothing but shelves lined with folders and a dusty table in the center. Yet something felt off. It wasn't just the silence. It was the sense that something had been moved recently, as if someone had rushed out only moments before they entered. Alex stepped inside and scanned the shelves. "Someone's been here," he whispered, pointing at a stack of files that were tilted, their edges not aligned the way usually organized archives were. Sophia traced her finger along the table, finding a faint fingerprint smudged across the surface, fresh enough to stand out clearly. They exchanged a look filled with quiet tension, both realizing the same thing. Whatever mystery they were getting entangled in was deeper than they expected. The missing documents, the strange behavior from people around them, the coded messages, they weren't coincidences. As they left the room, Sophia's phone buzzed with a new notification. It was another anonymous email. No subject, no sender, only a single line, "You're late." Someone else knows now. Her heartbeat quickened. The timing was too sharp, too precise. Whoever was sending these messages wasn't just observing, they were tracking every move. Alex leaned closer to look at the screen, his brows tightening. "This means someone else is involved," he said. "Someone we didn't consider before. And they're closer than we think," Sophia added. They stepped back into the main hallway, and the tension around them only grew thicker, as if the building itself was hiding secrets behind every wall. They could feel the weight of the unknown pressing in, the story shifting from simple curiosity to something more dangerous. The deeper they went, the more they realized they weren't just uncovering a hidden truth, they were stepping into a network of lies carefully woven by people who didn't want to be exposed. Later that evening, they met Daniel at the small cafe down the street, someone they thought they could trust. He had helped them before, guiding them with hints and old reports he had access to. But tonight, his expression was different. Nervous, guarded. He kept checking the door as if waiting for someone to burst in at any moment. "You two need to stop for a while," Daniel said, lowering his voice. "This isn't just about stolen documents or hidden files anymore. There's more at stake, more people involved." Sophia studied him carefully. "Why are you suddenly worried now? You encouraged us to keep going." Daniel's eyes shifted to the window, where a car parked across the street seemed to have been sitting for far longer than normal. He swallowed, hesitating before answering. "Because I didn't know they were watching me too." The words hit them like a sudden gust of cold wind. Sophia leaned back, absorbing his confession. "Who's watching you?" Daniel's fingers tapped nervously on the table. "I don't know, but they want something I have, and they think I gave it to you." Alex realized something then. "The files you showed us last time, those weren't just old reports, were they?" Daniel didn't deny it. Instead, he looked down, almost ashamed. "I should have told you earlier. That information wasn't meant to be in my hands. It's part of something bigger, something people have tried to bury for years." Before they could question him further, the cafe door opened with a sharp chime. A man stepped inside, wearing a dark coat, his eyes scanning the room with unsettling precision. Alex recognized him instantly. It was the same figure he had seen outside the building earlier that day. The same man who had disappeared into the crowd before Alex could call out. Daniel stiffened. "That's him," he whispered. "He's been following me for a week." Everything around them seemed to slow. The clinking of cups, the soft chatter, all faded as the man's gaze locked onto their table. Sophia's pulse raced, but she forced her expression to stay calm. The tension climbed with every passing second, almost unbearable. Without warning, Daniel stood up abruptly. "I'll distract him," he said under his breath. "You two need to leave. Now." "Daniel," Sophia started, but he cut her off. "If you stay, all of us get caught. Go!" His voice carried a mixture of fear and resolve, as if he had already accepted the risk he was about to take. Alex grabbed Sophia's hand, pulling her toward the back exit. They slipped out just as Daniel approached the stranger, blocking his view. They heard the faint exchange of words, low and tense, but couldn't make out the details. Outside, the night air felt heavy. The streetlights cast long shadows that stretched unnaturally across the pavement. Sophia looked back at the cafe door, worry knotting inside her. What if something happens to him? Alex exhaled slowly. Right now we can't think about that. We need to figure out why they're after him and us. Just as they turned the corner, Sophia's phone buzzed again. Another message. Another twist. This time, the email contained a single attachment, a blurry photo of the three of them sitting in the cafe just minutes ago. The caption below it read, "You're running out of time." Her stomach dropped. Someone wasn't just watching from a distance. Someone was close, too close, and they were tightening the grip around the truth piece by piece. Everything they thought they knew was beginning to crumble. Every answer led to a new question. Every step forward uncovered a deeper layer of secrets. And now, with Daniel in danger and a new player entering the game, the stakes had risen far beyond what they ever expected. If they wanted to survive this, they would have to uncover the truth before the truth consumed them. But the most terrifying part was that they still had no idea who their real enemy was, or how much control that enemy already had. Sophia stared at the photo on her phone for a long moment, her heart thudding so hard it echoed in her ears. The image was grainy but clear enough to confirm one thing. Whoever was watching them wasn't hiding anymore. They wanted to be seen. They wanted to put pressure on her and Alex, pushing them toward a breaking point. She slipped the phone into her pocket, and the two of them hurried down the dim alley, keeping their heads low. The street ahead felt strangely empty, as if the whole city was quietly holding its breath. They didn't stop until they reached the old warehouse Daniel had mentioned once, a place where he said everything had started years ago. Sophia didn't know what she expected to find there, only that her instincts told her this was the only place that still held answers. The metal door groaned as Alex pushed it open, the sound echoing through the hollow space. Inside, the air smelled like old dust and forgotten secrets. Boxes were scattered everywhere, some torn open, some sealed tight as if untouched for years. Sophia lifted one of the lids and found files with Daniel's handwriting on them. Reports, names, dates, everything connected to the mysterious project they had been digging into. She flipped through the pages, her breath catching when she saw a familiar name repeatedly showing up, Caleb Hart. A man known for operating in the shadows, someone people whispered about but never saw. A fixer, a manipulator, someone who cleaned up the mess for powerful people. Alex moved to another box and froze. Sophia, you need to see this. She walked over, and in his hand was a stack of photos. Not just of Daniel, but of her, of Alex, of her family, taken months before any of this began. Sophia felt her legs weaken. This started long before we thought. Before Alex could respond, a voice echoed from the upper platform of the warehouse. You're right. It did. They spun around, and there he stood, Daniel. But something was different. His jacket was torn, dirt smeared across his face, yet his eyes carried a strange calmness. Relief washed through Sophia, but it quickly twisted into confusion when she noticed he wasn't alone. Behind him stepped the same man from the cafe, his expression unreadable. Sophia took a step forward. Daniel, what happened? Did he? Daniel held up a hand. He didn't do anything to me. He saved me. The words hit her harder than any threat. Alex looked just as stunned. The stranger stepped forward, his tone steady and controlled. You two have been chasing the wrong enemy. We've been watching you to make sure you didn't fall into Caleb's trap. Sophia couldn't understand. Then why follow us? Why send those messages? To protect you, the man said. Caleb already had eyes on both of you. We only intervened when he made his move. Daniel exhaled shakily. I should have told you sooner. Years ago, I discovered Caleb's involvement in illegal data manipulation, something that affected thousands of people without their knowledge. When I tried exposing him, he threatened my family. I backed down, but I kept the evidence. I thought staying quiet would keep everyone safe. Sophia's voice trembled. But it didn't. No, Daniel replied, guilt clouding his expression. Because someone leaked part of the truth recently. Caleb panicked, and he thought I finally broke the silence. Alex stepped closer. So he came after you. And us. Daniel nodded. When he couldn't find the files, he assumed I passed them to you. Sophia's mind raced as everything connected. The strange emails, the shadow in the hallway, the pressured feeling that someone was always behind them. All of it pointed back to Caleb. And now, standing in the warehouse filled with proof, Sophia realized there was only one way out, to expose everything. The stranger, whose name was finally revealed as Aaron, pulled out a small device and tapped it. A screen lit up, showing live footage. Cameras, offices, documents. Caleb himself shouting at someone off-screen. Aaron said, "We've been gathering all the evidence we need. But we needed you here because you're the only ones Caleb doesn't expect." Sophia took a deep breath. "What do we have to do?" Aaron handed her a USB drive. "Upload this to the public server you have access to. Once it's out, Caleb won't be able to silence it. Or you." The decision weighed heavy, but Sophia didn't hesitate anymore. She knew too much, lost too much peace, and risked too much to walk away. She grabbed the drive, turned toward the warehouse exit, and then everything went dark. A loud crash echoed across the room. The overhead lights flickered violently before shutting off completely. Sophia staggered, caught off guard. A cold gust of air swept through the warehouse as heavy footsteps approached. The sound was too familiar, too deliberate. A slow, mocking clap echoed in the darkness. "Well done," a voice drawled. "You finally pieced it together." Sophia felt the blood drain from her face. Caleb. He stepped into the faint moonlight leaking from a broken window. His presence alone carried an unsettling calm, like someone who knew he was in control. "I must say, I didn't expect you to get this far." Alex moved instinctively in front of Sophia. Daniel tried to pull her back, but Caleb raised a hand. Relax. I'm not here to harm anyone yet. I only want what's mine. He pointed toward the USB in Sophia's hand. You can walk away safely, Caleb said, his voice smooth. Just give it to me. Forget all of this. Sophia's fingers tightened around it. You ruined too many lives. This needs to end. Caleb tilted his head, almost amused. Courage is admirable, but foolish. Before he could take another step, Aaron activated a button on his device. Lights snapped back on, brighter than before. Hidden cameras installed around the warehouse blinked to life, all pointing at Caleb. Live streaming. Caleb froze. Just a moment, but long enough for the fear to crack through his mask. It's over, Aaron said firmly. Everything you say from this moment is being recorded, publicly. Caleb's jaw tightened. His eyes darted around, looking for a way out. For the first time, he looked cornered. Sophia stepped forward. You don't control the truth anymore. Caleb lunged toward her, but Alex intercepted him, knocking him off balance long enough for Aaron to restrain him. Daniel backed Sophia away, making sure she stayed clear of the struggle. The tension hit its peak, raw, chaotic, intense, but after a few moments, Caleb collapsed under Aaron's hold, defeated. Sirens echoed in the distance. Someone had already alerted the authorities. As Caleb was dragged away, Sophia felt the weight she'd been carrying for days finally loosen. The truth was out. The danger was ending. The conflict that once felt impossible to escape had finally cracked open. But just when everything seemed to settle, Sophia's phone buzzed again. One last message. No sender, no signature. Only 3 words. He wasn't alone. Her breath hitched. She turned sharply, scanning the warehouse, the street outside, the rooftops. And in the far corner, almost hidden in the shadows, someone watched quietly before disappearing into the night. The story wasn't fully over. Not yet. Sophia stood frozen, staring at the message glowing on her phone screen. The warehouse felt suddenly colder, as if the shadows had thickened the moment Caleb was taken away. The sirens faded into the night, leaving behind a heavy silence that made the warning feel even sharper. She looked toward the corner where the figure had stood just moments earlier, but the space was now empty, nothing but dust floating through the air. Alex stepped beside her, gently touching her arm. His voice was calm but cautious as he asked, "What does it say?" Sophia showed him the screen without speaking, and his expression tightened. They both knew this wasn't paranoia. Whoever sent that message understood exactly when to strike and how to keep fear alive even when the worst villain had already been handcuffed. Daniel walked toward them, calmer now that the immediate danger had passed. "Let me guess," he said quietly. "A warning." Sophia nodded, and Daniel sighed as if the weight of years dropped heavily onto his shoulders again. Caleb never worked alone. People like him always keep someone above them or someone behind them. Aaron joined the small circle, looking more serious than before. He studied the message and then shook his head. "This isn't a threat," he said slowly. "This is someone watching to see what you'll do next. Someone who expected Caleb to fall and is now waiting to step into his place." For a moment, Sophia felt the panic rise again, but she forced herself to breathe. She reminded herself that the truth was already out, the evidence was public, and Caleb's influence had weakened the moment millions of eyes saw the streamed footage. The corporate cover-up he built so carefully had already started to crumble. People online were dissecting the files, news reporters were rushing to verify the leaked information, and former employees were stepping forward with their own stories. The company's billion-dollar license, the one Caleb protected at any cost, was officially suspended within hours. As one article described it, it was corporate checkmate. The system finally caught up to him. But even with the victory unfolding, Sophia couldn't shake the image of the figure in the shadows. Still, she pushed the fear aside. Tonight wasn't about running anymore. Tonight was about ending the story that had turned her life upside down. She looked at Daniel, who had been avoiding her eyes ever since the police arrived. His guilt was written across his face, and she realized he was waiting for her to blame him. Instead, she stepped forward and hugged him gently. "You should have trusted us earlier," she whispered. "But I'm glad you trusted us now." Daniel's voice broke a little as he replied, "I'm sorry you had to get pulled into this. I never wanted any of it to reach you. Sophia stepped back and gave him a small smile. We can't change what happened, but we can close it properly. They all agreed to leave the warehouse together. As they stepped outside, the cool night air felt like a reset after the suffocating tension inside. The police cars were gone, the streets quiet again. Aaron promised to stay in contact, explaining that the remaining loose ends needed monitoring, not panic. Whoever sent that message won't act immediately, he said calmly. They're testing you, and sometimes the best response is not reacting at all. Alex wrapped an arm around Sophia as they walked back toward the main road. Her body finally relaxed for the first time in days, though the exhaustion hit her all at once. She leaned into him slightly, grateful he'd been there through every twist and danger. It's over, right? She asked softly. Alex thought for a moment before answering. The worst part, yes. The rest, we'll handle it together if it ever shows up. By the time they reached her apartment, the sky was turning a faint shade of gray. The early morning birds were already awake, unaware of the chaos the night had carried. Sophia sat on her couch, letting herself absorb the quiet. For the first time, the silence didn't feel threatening. It felt peaceful, safe. She checked her phone again, half expecting another message, but nothing appeared. Just a long list of notifications from people online thanking her anonymously for exposing the corruption, sharing their own experiences with unfair corporate systems, and feeling encouraged by the story. Hours later, Sophia finally slept. When she woke up, sunlight poured through her windows, replacing every shadow with warm brightness. Alex had stayed on the chair beside her the whole time, ensuring she wasn't alone. She sat up slowly, looking around the room, and realized something surprising. She didn't feel afraid anymore. Instead, there was clarity. The next week was filled with statements, interviews, and follow-up investigations. The company struggled to defend itself, but couldn't escape the evidence. Former executives cooperated, employees celebrated the truth coming out, and even government officials acknowledged the importance of accountability. Sophia wasn't trying to be a hero. She simply refused to be silent when something unjust was done to her and the people around her. But that small refusal turned into something bigger, something meaningful. As for Caleb's final message, Aaron later confirmed what he suspected. Caleb had been working with a small network of insiders, but without him, their structure fell apart quickly. The last remaining member fled the country, leaving behind nothing but unanswered questions. It wasn't a perfect ending, but it was enough. Enough to know the immediate danger was gone. Enough to know the corruption had been exposed. Enough to know that she could move forward without looking over her shoulder every second. One evening, Sophia stood on her balcony, watching the city lights flicker. The air was calm, the night peaceful. She thought back to the moment everything had begun, when her bonus was erased without explanation. At the time, it felt small, almost petty. But that moment turned into a chain reaction that revealed massive corporate wrongdoing and shook an entire system. It reminded her that sometimes the smallest injustice is the first sign of a much larger story waiting to be uncovered. Alex joined her by the railing. "So," he said softly, "what now?" Sophia smiled. "Now. I live. I rest. I breathe. And I move on knowing we did the right thing." Alex nodded, placing a hand over hers. "You did more than the right thing. You changed something that needed to change." For a long time, they stood there quietly, watching the city that had once felt threatening now feel familiar and safe again. The story had reached its end, not with a dramatic chase or a final confrontation, but with truth winning in a steady human way. Before going inside, Sophia took one last look at the skyline. She didn't know what challenges the future held, but she knew one thing for certain. She wasn't afraid anymore. She had faced the darkness, uncovered the lies, survived the threats, and turned a moment of loss into a moment of strength. And just like that, the chapter closed. Not perfectly, not neatly, but naturally. The conflict was resolved. The shadows were gone, and Sophia finally stepped into the light.